From courtside the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC podcast, episode number 393. Andrew with you once again. I am Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. My co-host is Derek. You know him in the forum as Deeper3, and he is Deeper384 on Twitter.
No, I'm happy to be here again as always. Game 5, NBA Live 10 tournament. You versus B-Train.
That's right.
And this is the first series that's gone the distance. So this is the final game of the series. And I heard it was really good.
It was quite a battle, and I knew it would be. I've mentioned on the last couple of shows with the first 4 games that we split them, went the distance, as you said, and through the first 3 quarters, it was virtually neck and neck. I had a very slim lead that I was just holding on to by the skin of my teeth. I managed to pull some defensive magic and some offensive magic too in the fourth quarter. I'm looking forward to you seeing the footage. B-Train hasn't had an opportunity to shoot it along to you at the time that we're recording this, but yeah, I'm going to be very interested to hear your thoughts on how I played, because you and I will be facing off, and you are quite familiar with how I play NBA Live 10, as that has been one of our past games of choice, of course. But yeah, I was doing it a little bit differently. I was trying to pull out some new tricks out of the bag in Game 5, but I did get the win, and hats off to B-Train, a great opponent, a great sporting opponent, as I've said before, really made me earn it.
Yeah, and how awesome is it to be playing for something?
Oh yeah,
like the adrenaline. Yeah. You don't want to be out in the first round. You want to look forward to more games in the tournament and maybe a shot at the finals, all of that stuff. That's why I think this is so great. I mean, it must have been, like, especially in the fourth quarter, because like you said, it was tight. Like, the game was close and he was playing really well. In the fourth quarter, you must have been sweating a little bit. And that's always fun.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, it's a video game at the end of the day. I mean, if I was out in the first round, I would have been bummed, of course, but look, life goes on, and we have more tournaments to play and to look forward to. But he was playing to win, as was I, and yeah, I was feeling some nerves. I was definitely feeling a bit tight going into that fourth quarter, and knowing I have a chance to win and move on in a game that counts, because we are running this tournament, of course. So I was definitely feeling the pressure, and I'd like to think that I rose to the challenge on this occasion.
That's awesome. Yeah, you were telling me before the call that you used Joakim Noah a little bit more as a playmaker, which they kind of did in real life.
Yes. It's one of those things where you get very used to using a point guard in NBA Live 10, because of course it has an issue with point guard domination with the CPU. My go-to example here, of course, is Chris Juhan, burning me for 35 points and 15 assists, way too often with the CPU, and of course B-Train had CP3 as Chris Paul on the Hornets, so it was a tough matchup at point guard there. So the temptation is to use Derrick Rose as much as possible, but of course you've got Joakim Noah there as a facilitator, as a big, and there at the top of the key, as he used to do in real life, as you said. So I was trying to mix it up a little bit and using him as a facilitator as well. So it worked out. It worked out, and I was quite pleased to move on, and quite relieved, because again, B-Train was quite challenging, and again, a great sport. Unfortunately, when I was running down the clock at the end, because I did have a double-digit lead, and I took a 3 late as the shot clock was winding down, because there was more than 24 seconds left, and I made it, and I felt a bit bad because it was running up the score, and I did apologize to him. Said, look, I should have just let that expire. He said, look, no worries, no harm, no foul. So I appreciate that, and it was a great competitive series, and yeah, I'm hoping that we can replicate that.
Yeah, he seems to be a really good guy. He's
Absolutely.
Also very good at the game. Like I was telling you before, I've watched your games, all of them. Because I had to, because I chop them up and put highlights together and stuff for the YouTube channel so people can watch them. So now in the semifinals, it's me with the Nuggets. So the Chauncey Billups, J.R. Smith, Carmelo Anthony, Kenyon Martin, Nene Nuggets versus Andrew with the Bulls. And what's funny about this is there's some drama that leads up to this, because the last game that we played on NBA Live 10, I beat you with a past half-court game winner with Michael Finley.
Indeed.
So that's our last experience on Live 10 together.
Yeah, it is. We haven't been playing much lately, you and I. We haven't been able to hook up and play many past games over the past week or so.
that's partly my fault, and it has nothing to do with, like not wanting to do it as much. It's because, as you know, I've been trying to connect with as many people as possible and get them on Parsec. I've connected with Rich from the community, from the 2K14 section.
Oh, yes.
We played
yes.
the other night. I'm connecting with people from the Parsec Discord. I'm getting games in. I've gotten games in with many people since the last time we played, many new people who hadn't tried the program before. So, again, it's more of, guys, get on this application, play with me for the first time so you can see how great the application is and how great it works, and start connecting with each other, because this is what it's all about. Like being able to do this, and like that adrenaline you felt in the fourth quarter, and the fun you had in that series, and the fun that I had playing Ermoli, and the ridiculous series between Cavs and Manny Live, and just my games with at B-Ball Video Games on NBA 2K10 and NBA 2K11. Those were great highlights, right?
Oh,
That was
yeah,
fun.
yeah.
We both had a great time.
And look, I do enjoy
That's
single player, perhaps more than you do, because I grew up that way. Unless my cousin was down, I was usually playing single player. I've gotten more into the online team play in recent years, of course, as I've talked about on many previous podcasts with Kenny and Ben and X and Valor and also ZZ Cool J when we did the NLSC Thrill Ho in 2K Pro Am. But I like that variety. I like to play a bit of my career in 2K14, which I've been doing lately. I'm traditionally a franchise gamer as well. I love just doing some retro matchups. I've been doing that a lot in 2K14 and other games lately, just playing with retro teams and really enjoying doing that as a change of pace from my career. But then getting on and playing some head-to-head as well. Just changing up and experiencing everything that basketball gaming has to offer. I think that's the wonderful thing about basketball gaming over the past 20 years especially, that we have all these different experiences to, experience.
Right, and now we can revisit those old games and share them with other people and
Exactly.
play them more and do all of that stuff. And that's what's super exciting about it. Like being able to jump on NBA 2K10 and play the 96-97 mod with at B-Ball Video Games and do that Trailblazers versus Bucks matchup. I mean, how awesome is that? That game has not been online in a very long time. And he's able to connect with me, and we're able to play games, and he has no lag. Like, it works perfect for him. And NBA 2K11, the same thing when we played the 91-92 mod. And he used the Cavs, and I used the Supersonics. So it's awesome to revisit the games. And like you said, because we can do that now, we have all that variety too. Like you have the arcade games, the old jam games like College Slam, if you want to throw that on, all of that. You have, the mid-2000s games, early 2000s, early 2010s. So, yeah, the opportunities are endless. For the NBA Live 10 tournament on the opposite side of the bracket, just for people who don't know, I'm going to be updating the bracket this weekend. It's Cavs 4872, who's using the Cavs, fitting, and QB 1120, who's Q in the forums, and he's using the Lakers. And that is going to be a great series because I've actually watched both of them play because I had to host both of their series. And both of them play pretty similar. They both like to run out with big lineups. So they like to deploy big lineups on the floor, et cetera. Like Cavs put Zydrunas Ilgauskas and Shaq together, starting, and played them the most together. And then Q puts Kobe at point guard and puts Lamar Odom also in the starting lineup. So this is going to be two big lineups going at it, and they play pretty similar on the game. So we'll see what happens. So it's either the four teams that have a chance to be in the finals are going to be the Nuggets, the Bulls, the Cavs, and the Lakers.
That up-tempo style as well, it's funny because if you watch the highlights that you've been putting together and been uploading to the NLSC YouTube channel, youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center, of course, is that you can kind of scout. We can all scout each other to a certain extent.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And maybe I have an advantage because I get to watch the whole game.
I was going to say you've got...
But I have. It's been working out great. I mean, how cool is that? That's the other thing that doesn't get talked about enough is I'm hosting other games. So we have two people connecting to my computer, and they're playing their playoff series, and I'm recording and watching the action. However, I will say that the videos that I do upload to YouTube, I include a lot. If you actually watch, those minutes are usually 8 to 10 minutes long. and these are only 6-minute a quarter games, and I include most baskets in every game on those highlights. So people can still get a pretty good idea of how these people play.
Yeah, like I say, we're going to be probably by next week, next episode, we'll have probably played at least a couple of games, I would imagine, and that'll be interesting to see because we've had some very good battles in the past.
Yeah, I still, like I said, I still can't even believe the last game we played is that Finley game winner.
Yeah.
So like I said, there's drama. There's drama coming in.
And I have managed to beat you a couple of times with Bulls teams, an all-time Bulls team, and also the 2005 Bulls as well. So maybe I play this a little bit harder when I play with a Bulls team. Maybe psychologically, that's what I'm bringing to the table, I guess.
Or maybe you get caught off guard because you've never played against me with the Nuggets.
This is true, and I do know that you love those. You love those Nuggets teams, various Nuggets teams from the late.
I do.
2000s.
I'm more of a fan of the Iverson ones. Yeah, I'm more of a fan of the Iverson Nuggets teams. But this still has a lot of pieces from those teams. So it still has J.R. Smith, Nene, Kenyon Martin, Carmelo Anthony, and whatnot. So a bonus is having Birdman on the bench, Chris Anderson. And I've used him a little bit in the playoffs so far in my series with Armoli. But yeah, I thought it would be a little bit cheap to use the Celtics, to be honest.
Well, I mean,
I didn't.
The downside is if you make it through to the finals, which, like I say, I'll totally admit that it's certainly a possibility. I'm not going to trash talk here. If you make it through the finals against Q, then we do miss out on Lakers versus Celtics. That is a downside.
That is the downside, right? Exactly. I just didn't. I wanted to use a team that didn't have as many known pieces, as in like as many prominent pieces. Let's put it that way. So being a fan of that Nuggets team and the one with Iverson as well, I thought that was made a little bit more sense. But you know how I was telling you, we were talking about that adrenaline that you were getting, playing B-Train and how we both like that, getting immersed in the action and the challenge and having something to play for. It actually has me back into MyTEAM.
You were saying, we were talking about that before we started recording, and that was your goal this year, to get it back into some MyTEAM, and it sounds like you're enjoying it, and because 2K15 was kind of the last time you really felt good about that mode, and we went through the developer blogs a couple of weeks ago, and we thought it was pretty promising. So yeah, it sounds like it's working out okay on next gen at least.
Yeah, I won't be touching the multiplayer portion. I heard it's incredibly toxic. And
yeah, I'll leave that alone.
Really want to get involved. Yeah, I heard somebody had mentioned that there's already a card that somebody has where it's like Dikembe Mutombo is like really high 3-point rating and he's just smoking threes out there. It's like I'm not putting up with that. I also won't juice my guys up like that. Like I'm not going to use cards like that, and I'm not going to apply badges or do anything like that with cards that are unrealistic. Like I want to play with the guys that I have realistically, like they played in real life.
Yeah. Which I think MyTEAM should be. It's a shame it's gone away from that, as I've said before.
Oh, 100%. So I'm jumping into Domination, which was my favorite mode before. And the nice thing is it's something I've never tried before. They have the all-time Domination as well. So after I'm done playing against all the regular teams, I'm going to jump into all-time. And, for my starting lineup in Domination, I have Calvin Murphy, Isaiah Ryder, a poor version with no badges of Isaiah Ryder, a poor version of George Gervin, very minimal badges, and he's just slow and sluggish. And I have Dirk Nowitzki, and I have Kareem. And both of those guys are just the 85 overall version, so they're not like super special or anything like that. So with that, and with me not boosting those guys, it was a challenge, and my games have been a challenge, and that's been really welcoming. And I like getting immersed in the action, and because of the way the offense plays in NBA 2K22, where they're constantly trying to run stuff and they're constantly trying to look for cutters, and if you leave them open even on rookie, they're making like 90% of their open shots. Like they're just not missing on the rookie challenge. It's nuts how much they make. You have to be aware even on rookie at all times. And the way they play defense on the different difficulty levels, so rookie, pro, and all-star for the Domination, you kind of have to play each challenge a little bit differently. And I really enjoy that. And I feel like I'm getting really immersed in the action. And, on Pro and All-Star, I'm doing more of pumping the ball into Kareem and having him, utilizing his sky hook. I'm doing more back to the basket and fade work with Dirk Nowitzki. I'm setting more high screens and, shooting in space right off of the screen, or, looking for the roll man and hitting him and then making that extra pass out to the wide open shooter when their defense rotates. Like, I shared highlights and I did a thread on this, like you saw, on how I have to play different on Rookie, Pro, and All-Star, and how I have to, basically take advantage of certain opportunities and everything. And it's been enjoyable. I'm not going to lie. I mean, the game still has some issues that bug me, like I talked about, like the whole ghost defense and the whole sucking in, like you drive the lane and you look like you have all of this free space, and then you're sucked backwards into a defender, or he's sucked forwards into you, and you miss a layup which should have been wide open. Like, that stuff is still there, but I'm still incredibly immersed in the action. And I'm still able to pull off some pretty cool things and have some authenticity with the way I use my team and the way I cover the opposing team. So, yeah, I'm back into it, and I think I'm going to keep playing. No, and that's kind of fun for me. So.
It's really good to hear and to see, obviously, because some of our impressions last week, I couldn't cover the game in much detail, unfortunately. I still can't. A whole week has gone by, and my pre-order that I pre-ordered has not arrived, unfortunately. That it's just the way Australia Post is during the current lockdown here in New South Wales. We're only getting posts 3 days a week, so yeah, it hasn't come in parcel post yet. Again, I probably should have gone digital this year, but you know me, I like my physical collectibles, so I thought I would go physical this year. Bit of a mistake, obviously. So I haven't been able to play the PS5 version yet. Very much looking forward to it, because the more you talk about it and the more you share, the more I think that I am going to enjoy it this year on that platform. Current gen is probably not going to be, probably not too much time spent with that this year. I do have the PS4 version, has arrived, so I've been able to get that updated. I've also, on my spare Windows 10 PC, I've been able to get the updates down. It's not good enough to play the game, but it's good enough to at least run it and get the updates through, which pretty much confirms that it is a Windows 7 and 8.1 issue. I have passed that information along to Leftos so that he and his team can look into that, and hopefully they can come to a resolution for people who are running older systems. I'm probably going to finally bite the bullet and upgrade to Windows 10 this week sometime, because it's been putting it off for too long, and it would just be, I need to do that on my main desktop PC, my main gaming PC. That's just the way it goes. But that is nice to actually get some confirmation on that and be in touch with Leftos. Any information that I get, I will pass along. I've got a thread in the forum about that. No solution from our end yet. It is usually with the stuck updates, it was a matter of deleting sync bin or disabling antivirus firewall, or there were some steps we could take ourselves, as you recall. But this is an issue where the on Windows 7 and 8.1, it appears that the updates are getting blocked as they go through the various paths through through to the 2K server. So this is an issue that 2K will have to fix. But it sounds like that they're at least aware of it, because I have sent that through to Leftos and sent some more information through. So I will get to play those versions, the PC version, a little bit more in the future. But looking forward to getting on PS5, because it is looking like people are having fun with it. That being said, there are some issues. There are some people having some problems with my career progression not working properly, not saving, not progressing. And this is why, Derek, I said it last week, and obviously I can't speak firsthand on the PS5 version as yet, and I do want to give the current gen version more of a chance before I write my final review and give more impressions here on the podcast. But this is why you don't say this is the best game or the worst game within the first week, even first weekend, or even the first week of having the game. You've got to give it a chance, because these issues present themselves, and suddenly they can really affect the experience.
Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff with the server-related issues, my career progression issues, the camera issues, stuff like that. Dazar tweeted out that he believes that this might be the first clean gameplay launch in a long time. I used 2K11 as one example. I think 2K16 is another one possibly, and 2K17, and saying basically the gameplay is as close to perfect as you can get it. And I completely disagree with that. I still think there's a lot of problems with it, but that's part of the problem is even the developers, even people, they're going on social media and saying things like this might be the best 2K ever, or this is a top 3 2K ever, or they're making comments like he did, like this might be a great or close to perfect or perfect gameplay by default, like on release. So yeah, and then you see all the people like you had talked about, like in the first couple of days, they're like, oh my God, this game is the greatest. I love it. I'm enjoying the gameplay so much since last year, the functionality, all of that stuff. And then, like you said, they a week later or 2 weeks later, they're like all up in arms and pissed off at the world. And they're like, this isn't working right. My progression isn't working right. These guys are on pro. Why can't I even move by them? Why am I picking up my dribble all the time? Why am I missing this layup 5 times in a row? Like that's what ends up happening a week or 2 later. Like,
because there's an initial euphoria.
Gun and the hype. Yeah,
and
exactly.
I understand it, and it's important to, you can have those first impressions. Like my first impressions were quite negative, and I reserve the right to say, you know what, I've spent more time with the game, I've gotten used to it, it's working properly, I've got the updates through, now I'm feeling differently about it. And this is why I go back to games like a Live 10, like a Live 06, like a 2K14. It's always, even years later, you can have a better impression of a game, better thoughts about a game, different thoughts about a game. And I think that over the next few weeks, as I play 2K22, and both versions of it, I will continue to, my opinions on it will evolve as I continue to get used to it, and I see issues. Apparently there's still issues with my NBA with a lot of G League players ending up as 90-plus overall in the free agent pool. So there's a lot of legacy issues there that people, you got to wait. You've really got to do that deep dive into the game before you do your reviews and give Metacritic scores and everything else. You've got to look for these issues first, and they don't always present themselves in the first weekend of playing the game. Sometimes it does take a week or more, and you do start to see those foibles, and you start to see, okay, this is an exploit that works, and that's a problem. And look, they've pushed through a few patches. They haven't touched gameplay yet, but to that point, we don't know exactly what they've touched, because they're giving us no patch notes. You remember this was an issue last year, and it's the same thing this year. Various fixes to improve stability of the title. Cool. What are they? Even on next gen, they're not telling us what they've fixed, and that's a problem because, and it feels very disingenuous because we fixed up a few things, and it's kind of like not wanting to admit the problems of this so-called perfect greatest 2K ever. It bothers me that we want patch notes.
The height of social media, the height of social media, and the fact that 2K is kind of not looked at even close to as fondly as it was in the past. And, we've talked about 2K fatigue. We've talked about people the gameplay getting kind of stale for people and all of that stuff. And then all the new changes that they bring in, and people have frustrations with them, like the alley-oop meter and the contact dunk meter, and then like the shot stick a couple of years ago, usage and whatnot. And I think that heavily plays into it. It's frustrating, that broadcast camera issue, where I think I identified the reason for that, because the game stutters when you zoom out. And by the way, when I was talking about MyTEAM and getting into it, and I want to jump back into that in a second, I was talking about 2K22 next gen, just to let people know, not current gen. But on next gen, when you use the Portland Trailblazers and you put it on broadcast, they're like their stadium view, and you zoom all the way out, the game stutters a lot. When you grab a rebound in the game, you know how it zooms out and then tries to zoom back in on half court. When you try to push, when you get a rebound and you outlet it, or you're about to bring up the ball, all of that stuff, the game stutters on Xbox Series X. And I believe it does the same thing on PlayStation 5. So I wouldn't be surprised, and I showed video of this to you and I posted it on Twitter, I wouldn't be surprised if the reason why Broadcast Generic was taken out and why my NBA doesn't have adequate broadcast cams is because they're trying to figure out the stutter issue, because that would be a really bad look on next gen if you can't get a smooth frame rate when you're crossing half court.
It is a bad look, absolutely. But I put it to you, You know what's a worse look? Not acknowledging it at all.
Right. And I've tagged Dazar, I've tagged Baluba. Dazar will be on there and he'll make all of these tweets about, oh, people complaining about this and he'll talk or he'll talk up the game and all of that stuff. But he'll never say specifics and he won't respond to anything like the broadcast cam issue. Like he won't respond to it. I've tagged him on it. I've tagged Baluba on it. We don't get anything from them. So basically, where over a week past the game's launch, and on my NBA, you technically have no broadcast cam still. On my NBA broadcast, you have Rail and you have 2K cams, and that is it.
And look, you can see why they're doing it, and we've talked about this before, is that they don't want to acknowledge it because it admits a weakness in the game. It admits that there's a problem with the game. But the irony is, by not admitting it, they look even worse. And I think most people would look. There's always going to be people like, oh, there's a problem with the game, and where most reasonable people, which I would like to think are most people, the unreasonable people are very disproportionately loud. So I understand why they want to avoid them. But most reasonable people will say, thank you for acknowledging the issue and admitting it's there and letting us know that you're working on it. That would be. And maybe they're struggling to fix the issue, which is why they're not acknowledging it. But that transparency, that honesty would go such a long way, especially when people are saying, and you're not the only one tagging them and bringing up this issue on social media. So we're not the only ones, despite the who plays on broadcast cam. Actually, a lot of people, thank you very much. So you can't be quiet about this, and they always are, and it's continually frustrating. And you see some of the 2K reps or developers saying that, complaining about us complaining, but we are paying for a product, and this is an issue, and we kind of deserve an answer about this.
Well, it's another thing it's another thing that takes away from the NBA portion of the game, like the My NBA portion and whatnot. It's another example of that is having no way of turning the meters off for dunk and contact meters unless you remove all gameplay indicators. Because the reason why they're doing that is because what are they thinking about? They're thinking about the online scene and how those people are going to use those meters, right? And how they're going to need to have those meters on. But what about those people that want to play Sim?
Sure.
What about those people that want to play in My NBA and they don't want the meters on? What if they want to have that functionality turned off? All of that stuff. And it's really, somebody left a comment on one of my YouTube videos, and I do agree with this. And he said something about the NBA portion of the game looking a hell of a lot like Park, and like the Park animations and whatnot. My brother, he didn't even mean to do this. He went to, he threw a pump fake with Andrew Wiggins and went to do like a drive and then into like a spinning fadeaway, which he does in real life. But instead of just doing a regular dribble into his shot, he did, and my brother didn't do this. It's just like built into that moment. Andrew Wiggins had the ball and he like went with his right hand, he went through his legs from behind and did like a Park move before the fadeaway. And it's like, Nick didn't want that. That's my brother. Andrew Wiggins would never do that in real life, but that's the Park animations infiltrating the NBA game and making it look Park, right? So, like, what they're thinking, they're not the main focus is two things, in my opinion. It's getting people on. It's the getting people online, the Park gameplay, the rec style Park gameplay, and MyTEAM, getting people on MyTEAM. And what's MyTEAM full of? Juiced up unrealistic cards, right?
And microtransactions, yeah, exactly.
And microtransactions, right? So I agree with that comment on I agreed with him on the YouTube channel in the comment section. The game is mostly targeted to teenagers and people that they think are going to get, the people that they want to get online and all of that stuff. And that's why a lot of the NBA portion sometimes looks like Park. I do want to say really quick too about MyTEAM. I gave some compliments on it. And I love the, how immersed I've been into it. I like how I have to play different on Rookie, Pro, and All-Star. I like how I have to do a lot of thinking to beat the CPU. and I haven't lost a game yet. I beat the full Knicks challenge on all the levels, difficulty levels. I beat the Sixers, Celtics, all of that stuff. However, two things. One, I talked to you about this before the call. I'm really sick of watching people play these basketball games and not outletting the ball and running. Like, that is one of the best ways to beat the CPU, and it's basketball. Run. Like, I'm seeing so many people, like, they grab a rebound, and instead of outletting the ball and trying to push the pace, they literally just slow it up, and they stand at the top of the key and either do fancy dribbling for like 10 or 15 seconds and go nowhere and then take a contested shot at the end and then complain. Or they stand up at the top of the key and they run a play and they'll do some fancy dribbling while they wait for the play to run. And they'll have like 10 seconds where guys are running around the court. They'll pass it to the wing and they'll end up with still like a contested shot. What happened to outletting and running? I feel like more people, the more almost everybody that I watch play these games do not run fast breaks. It's like, screw it. We're going to do this half-court, ridiculous park stuff. We're all going to think that we're like James Harden or something like that. Or we're going to basically like try to fake sim and just run these long plays that get us nowhere. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. So so people know, if you want to do well on all three MyTEAM levels, like on Domination, Rookie, Pro, and All-Star, you grab the rebound and you run. Icon passing is your best friend, but apply the pressure and get out on the break. That's going to be your best friend. Two, the frustrations that I have with MyTEAM gameplay, and I think you've seen a lot of posts about this, some that kind of went viral. Even on Rookie or Pro, if you're using a guy who's only good, so not above average, not great, anything like that, just good or below average on dribbling, you have a 0% chance of ever getting by your man on a quick first step, or on a first step or with your dribble. You will have the weakest defenders in the entire NBA. You'll have like, trying to think of a name give me the name of a very poor defender in the NBA.
I'm drawing a blank as well, but yeah.
Yeah, because there's quite a few. So anyway, so a very poor defender in the NBA, and he will absolutely clamp you. Like, everywhere you go, he's there. His feet slide, yeah, because of the skating. His feet are sliding 100 miles an hour. You think that you made a good move or like a separation move, and he's right there in your grill. I see why a lot of people are frustrated with that because, one, that's not what happens in the NBA most of the time. Two, it's on all difficulty levels, right?
That really is a problem. Because people say get good, and there's I've seen Desire even make that suggestion, say, hey, if you want, if you're struggling, there's new stuff in the game, we've rebuilt the game, rewritten it, turn the difficulty down and get used to it. But if it's happening on every difficulty level, it's kind of a moot point. And if it's an unrealistic challenge, like everyone can stick to you like your Kawhi Leonard, like your Gary Payton, like a Scottie Pippen, to throw historical examples out there as well. Everyone in the game can play like the best on-ball defenders in history. That's not sim either, and especially that also indicates a lack of balance. And we've seen that in Live and 2K over the years, where they've tried to compensate on one end, and it's ended up being a bit overpowering. And it's one of those things where you don't want them to go too far the other direction as well, because it's one of those situations where the pendulum can sometimes swing back and forth too much, and that's from patch to patch, and we don't want that. But it does seem like the defense is just a little bit too OP when great ball handlers making sensible moves can't break weak defenders off the dribble. Can't break them down.
It's not realistic either, right? It's silly because, like, I have Isaiah Ryder, right, and I have George Gervin, and I was getting mismatches on Rookie with Kemba Walker, and now I can post them up and like abuse Kemba Walker in the post. That's fine. But if I try to make any move towards the hoop with Ryder or Gervin, I have a 0% chance of getting by him. A 0% chance of getting by Kemba Walker. It's like Kemba Walker is Gary Payton on steroids. If you want to get by Kemba Walker, what you can do is use a really good ball handler, if I like somebody highly rated, like if I have Kevin Durant on rookie or pro and Kemba Walker is on me and I do like a double cross or I go wide on a crossover or I go a quick change of direction, all of that stuff, I can get by Kemba Walker. But it takes that. And I think that's part of the game's design on purpose, right? Because what they want you to do is they want you to make your guy superhuman in order to get by this superhuman defense. And what do you have to do to make your guy superhuman? Spend a lot of time on the game, a ton of time on the game, and possibly spend money as well to upgrade your guy to get to that point. So I think there's a method to this, in my opinion. But I've enjoyed the challenge, and I put together quite a few good highlights. I am going to continue to play the mode. I'm going to continue sharing highlights. I'm going to upgrade my players realistically. Like, I'm not giving Kareem Steph Curry's dribble package. I'm not going to, suddenly be, jacking up threes with Kevin McHale like he's Steph Curry, etc. But I see why some people are frustrated with that. So combine that one-on-one defense that we're talking about, that ridiculous OP, unrealistic one-on-one defense with everybody, and combine that with that sucking in when you drive and the consistent missed layups and stuff like that. So I see why people are frustrated with it. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The other thing that I have going on is I take up way too much time on this podcast with this. Another thing that we have going on is my brother and I are 6 games into a Legend season, and I've been sharing highlights of that as well. And it's, the Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Kobe Bryant, Clyde Drexler, Hakeem Olajuwon, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Julius Erving team. And we do this every year, and we're beating the CPU right now by an average on Hall of Fame of 79 points per game, which is kind of cool. And it's just a fun, loose time. So my brother and I are getting our money's worth with next-gen NBA 2K22. Like, he's having a good time. We're putting together a bunch of highlights. We have a lot of oh moments and wow. And you saw one of the dunks Jordan did in the top 10 from that Legend season, the spin dunk.
Oh yeah,
and whatnot. So yeah, we're getting our money's worth, and that's a good thing. That doesn't mean that I agree with 2K's shady practices and the gambling mechanics or anything like that. And that's not me saying that there aren't issues with the game, but I am letting you know that at the moment we are getting our money's worth with the game.
And that makes me feel good about it as well, because I am looking forward to playing that PS5 version and giving the current gen version a bit more of a go. It's a shame I haven't wanted to touch it this week. I think there's been that frustration from not getting the PS5 version. There's also me kind of being really into my retro kick with 2K14, if I'm to be completely honest. But after those first...
no idea how many highlights Andrew has been sending me of 2K14. Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah, until I can get a true contender for the top 10, because there's a lot of plays that I send you that are, they're pretty good and they're fun to share and they're fun for me to keep in my collection and possibly use in future compilations that I do, or just to have there to look back on for my own enjoyment. But every so often, it's like, okay, this one I feel pretty, I'll send this one to you, or you'll say, yeah, send me that one, because it does stand out. But 2K14 has been my retro kick. I will be getting more into 2K22 with the PS5 version. I expect, as I've said before, that will be the version that I enjoy most. But I will be playing on PC and PS4 as well. In the short term, of course, playing on PS4, I can get that a little bit of MyTEAM progress and then carry that over to PS5. So that's nice there. But I have noticed a few people saying that the My Career is a bit of a disappointment this year with the progression issues, obviously. A lot of people, I think, are looking at the city and the neighborhood, and people kind of in our age group, or maybe just a little bit younger, but certainly older than the that tug demographic. And you mentioned the game being aimed at that younger audience that we're no longer a part of, and we're seeing it. And I think it was Cavs 4872 said in the forum that if he was a bit younger, he might enjoy that whole MMO approach with the city and My Career. But it just doesn't really, that whole quest system doesn't appeal to him. And I think
that tweet I retweeted. Sorry, I did that whole quest and NPC thing. The
Yes.
NBA 2K22 update. It's like, yeah, we're not a Barbie dress-up game, and we're about basketball, and we're
that tweet has aged. That tweet has aged so poorly.
I got to bring the Ronnie 2K one, but I got to bring up that tweet and read it out loud. So I'm going to let you continue while I bring up that tweet really quick.
So actually, it was a shout out to Rugstein, I guess, in the forum. Actually posted a thread. My career is trash. Change my mind. And my friend, I can't because, as I said in the thread, I do agree with you. Unfortunately, it has been going in that direction. And there's some things that I can appreciate what they're doing, and I'm sure it does appeal to that younger audience. But I saw the clip of somebody with a go-kart, and they're doing the big jumps in the go-kart going around the city. And look, if you're having fun with that, it's not my place to tell you that you cannot enjoy that. But to me, I see something like that and I think, isn't this a basketball game? And why weren't we focusing on some of the balance or proper matchmaking across all online modes, or all these things that are so much more important than a go-kart in a basketball game? I know this is not an original thought. I've said it in articles, I've said it on the podcast before, but it continues to bewilder and befuddle me that this continues to be something that's focused on in my career, and it does seem to be finding an audience. And I guess it's a good sign that me moving away from that mode is for the best, because it's not for me anymore.
Yeah. How about me not being, just wanted to throw this out there too, how about me not being able to put Kevin Durant at small forward or Penny Hardaway at point guard in my team?
Yeah, I mean the position lock has a purpose, especially with the online multiplayer in my team. But if they're not going to make the positions right on the cards, then it kind of it causes problems. That is the problem. Is if the cards aren't properly designed, if they don't have the right position, secondary position on them, then it does cause problems like that, and we're seeing it.
So here's the tweet. So tell me that this sounds like a basketball video game. An upcoming NBA 2K22 patch will remove tipping from DJ booths when propped near Quest NPCs. I want to point this out again. This is an NBA basketball game. This is NBA 2K22. I want to read that one more time. An upcoming NBA 2K22 patch will remove tipping from DJ booths and when propped near Quest NPCs. That sounds like an RPG.
That's Fallout. That's a Grand Theft Auto. That's an open world sandbox game, which is what they're trying to do with the city, from the sounds of it. And look, it sounds like they're kind of succeeding with it. But should it be that? I don't feel it should be.
Yeah, I mean, succeeding with it is another thing. It's another gray area because, again, they only have one option. I mean, gamers only have one option, is what I'm saying. Like, if you want to talk about sales or how much people are talking about it, if we want to count that as succeeding, there's no competition for it in the basketball space. So I don't know. We really need another competitor in the space. We really do. We need somebody else making a basketball game, something to compare 2K to.
No, it comes back to that. And we've said it so many times before ad nauseum, but it's just the way it goes. But to that point, you bring up the gameplay resembling Park, and that was a big problem that I had with NBA Live 19, that it seemed like they were focusing on the streets.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're doing that, it ruins authenticity from a basketball standpoint, from a simulation standpoint, and whatever and whatnot. When you're playing NBA Live 19, there's not much NBA authenticity in that game, and we talked about that several times on prior podcasts. The players don't, the players just kind of all blend in together a lot, and they don't, like I've used the Durant and Siakam examples where you don't really see a difference between using Kevin Durant and Siakam on that. There's no real authenticity, but that's because it wasn't about the NBA authenticity. It was more about Park, right? It was more about that online scene and whatnot. So yeah, I think it hurts realism, and I think it hurts the NBA portions, the NBA modes. I mean, we've seen what's happened to my team in the aspects that I'm not going to get into. The multiplayer aspect and the juiced cards and all of that stuff. One thing that I do like, and I think this is great, is I don't have to do that stuff, right? I can focus on domination, and I can focus on getting the cards that I want and making the players the way that I want to make the players and upgrading them the way I want and realistically, and, not go towards that toxic stuff and that unrealistic stuff.
Absolutely, because... And this is, people say, why would you play offline? Why would you play against bots? Because sometimes the experience is better than playing against toxic people online, quite frankly. But you can avoid a lot of the pay-to-win mechanics and the push to the very pushy mechanics that they have to try and get you to spend, because you need to have the latest and greatest players and packs and upgrade as quickly as possible to be competitive online. If you are just playing at your own pace, if you are playing My League, My NBA, etc., or the offline, the single player experiences in MyTEAM, you can avoid all that. You go at your own pace. They've got the daily challenges which tailor themselves to your lineup. You've got domination, which you can go through. Actually, I did want to ask, because I can't remember off the top of my head if it was in the developer blog, might have confirmed it. But with domination, you mentioned you're going through NBA domination at the moment. You want to go to all-time and historic domination. Can you jump into that straight away? Because you had to unlock it in previous years. You had to play through the current domination to actually unlock the historical ones. Can you actually jump into historical at any time this year?
That is a great question because I haven't tried it yet. I want to say that it's a little grayed out. I'm not sure. I'll have to look it up because I don't want to report on it unless I know it.
If it's grayed out,
maybe it is.
That probably means it's locked. Yeah. I do feel it's. I mean, that makes sense that you progress through that and get cards, and then you can get the better team to then progress to the harder domination challenges. But it's kind of a shame that you can't, if you wanted to, just try jumping into that mode as well.
Yeah, I guess I like goals. And I like unlocking, and I think that comes from being a gamer who went through the years of NBA's greatest and went through the years of unlocking historical content and unlocking, special aspects of the game. Like, I miss that stuff.
True.
So for me, I like having that goal.
It makes sense, but then I also look at a mode like Road Trip, on Fire Edition, which we are both fans of, obviously. I like that you can approach the campaign and kind of play any team you want straight away. There's also that flexibility of customizing your campaign. So I see it both ways.
And I love Road Trip, and we have to get back on that.
We do.
Soon. Maybe after a Live 10 playoff game or something, we can jump on OFE and whatnot, because I want to complete that entire Road Trip together, and I think that will be a lot of fun. And I love the highlights that it's producing as well, and the games that we've been able to upload. And I like showing off these titles, including like 2K10 and 2K11 and whatnot, but NBA Jam OFE in particular, because it reminds people of how great games still were. You know what I mean? Like how many great games we had from the past, and that not everything new is better.
Yeah, and I'd like to normalize retro gaming, because I think there's a stigma against nostalgia these days. As much as people indulge nostalgia and enjoy it, there is that thing, an old head stuck in the past, and who would play these games, look at the primitive graphics, etc. And I saw that on the official 2K subreddit. Somebody brought up NBA 2K11, and people were just... There was one person who was admittedly getting downvoted, and people were kind of dunking on them, saying, look at the graphics, and they're saying, yes, we know the graphics are primitive. We're talking about the gameplay experience and the approach to the design to modes and that kind of thing. And that's what people don't understand. And we mentioned this before when we've talked about some comments that people have made about old games, is it's not just about the graphics, because of course they do get better over time. That's, you and I, we remember games where players just had a couple of dots for eyes. Very very primitive facial features.
Yeah, can I bring something up really quick? So I just shared a highlight with you from @bball Video Games, and it was March Madness 2001. That's a game that's incredibly primitive graphically. Like, the graphics don't look great. They're pixelated. They don't look great to today's standards, okay? Let's put it that way. But that play, that steal, and that throwdown that he had at the end in traffic, what did that look like?
It looked fun. Yeah.
Fun gameplay. You're like, I want to jump on this game, and I want to replicate that. Right? Like, I want to get on this game. I want to get on the fast break, and I want to throw it down on two people. And, it's also not something always about graphics being better. It's also about what's appealing to you. Okay?
Sure.
So, sure, spec-wise, and sure, if it could look more like a player or look more like a realistic court and stuff like that, and that can be appealing, but those March Madness 2001 graphics are also appealing in their own way, from the colors, from the way the baskets look, the stanchions, how they move, all of that stuff when you make them, when you dunk and whatnot. Like, there's still an appealing aspect to it. It's not always like, well, the graphics are better, so you have to like them better, right?
Yeah, like, this is bigger picture stuff. It is bigger picture than what you see. I love to normalize that I'm not saying that you mustn't play the most recent game, because I've spent a lot of time in recent years playing the latest game. I will be spending hours of 2K22. I feel confident the more I see of the PS5, Xbox Series X version, I'm sure that I will spend time with that this year, no doubt. But I will also continue to go back to Live 10, to 2K14, to 2K11, to Live 06. And I think we should, that's one of the things I want to do with my Way Back Wednesday features. Obviously look back and celebrate the past and see how far we've come, but also normalize it's okay to go back and play these games and enjoy. Sometimes it's a more primitive experience, and sometimes that can be more fun, especially when it's not designed around recurrent revenue mechanics. Not to be a dead horse, but it is what it is. And there shouldn't be any stigma about that. And not just that, but there's also value in going back to those old games and seeing how they were made, and seeing the good ideas that could possibly work today. Fantasy teams in Live 10 it's very hard sell these days to 2K or Live if it's to come back, because you've got MyTEAM, Ultimate Team there, and they'd say, oh, well, that's what it's evolved into. But it is a different experience. Imagine if we had fantasy teams, Derek, in 2K22, and you and I could just connect on that game and pick from that entire roster of historical players. Yes, there are problems with historical players, as we've talked about before. That aside, that we could just say, okay, let's make that super team, and you could get all Celtics and everything else. Yes, we have the all-time Celtics and Bulls that we can play with, but then if we could mix and match all kinds of players and favorites and video game legends in there without making trades, play online, that fantasy teams mode could still be a great idea today. And there are other ideas like that as well. And there's also bad ideas that you can look back and say, this is how games have gone wrong over the years, and these are pitfalls to avoid. There is value in studying history in our hobby. Is it important to studying human history in the grand scheme of things? No. But for what we do here in the basketball gaming community, to give feedback to the developers, it is absolutely worth going back and looking at these games, seeing the good, seeing the bad, evaluating them so that we can give the better feedback, and also say, hey, let's avoid these ideas and let's go for these ideas as well. And on top of everything else, as you said, it's fun to play those old games. So there's so much value to get from visiting old games. I want to normalize it.
Yeah, what happened to fun? What happened to having fun? People, they're all frustrated and, everybody's toxic and, I'm going to grind. That's not fun for most people. I'm going to grind my guy up to 90 overall or 90 plus overall, or spend money to get my guy up to this overall. And I'm going to play online against people and have more frustration than enjoyment. So, that's what everybody else is doing. So that's what I'm going to do. Right. That's what's popular. Everybody else is online. Let me go online, all of that stuff. And there's that mindset. But what happened to just having fun? And that's why I'm connecting with so many people on Parsec. And that's why, I love the fact that you and I have been able to connect this year. It's been great this year, hasn't it?
It's been a great, a great year of gaming. Yeah. A great year of basketball gaming, either playing the latest or retro stuff. And I've enjoyed getting into that and playing that with you, playing it by myself. 2K14 has been a joy because it's been, as I've said before, it's a game that I didn't spend a lot of time with for various reasons back in the day. And getting into that, and it's funny because as much as I've been so sick of grinding in my career in recent games, to go through that story, that first My Career story, see some of the things I didn't experience back in the day, but also seeing how it's so NBA focused, seeing how it shows you how much VC you've earned over the course of your career. And I've earned about, I think it's over 40,000, somewhere between 42 to 44,000, I think, VC so far. And it's already got me to 80 overall and fairly pumped up ratings across the board where I can get some pretty dominant performances. I know how to, as a point guard in my career, to pretty much average a triple-double. I did it in 2K19 for a whole year. I've got that, and that's not me bragging. I just happen to have the techniques down. I know other people have done it too. It's easy once you know how. So it's something I've been able to enjoy. I'm able to do that without getting to 95 overall, 99 overall, and just seeing how cheaper the updates were all those years ago, that it wasn't necessary. This is offline version of my career, obviously, but wouldn't have even been necessary to buy VC back in the day. And of course, it's not focused on the online scene, so there's no push to really do it. You can do that at your own pace, and to really go back and it's just been a joy to go back and play something, and also to play with the retro teams. And you might have noticed from the highlights that I send you, when I play my career, I play on that behind. It's not a 2K cam, but it's that behind the player baseline camera that scrolls up and down and follows the player. Where when I play not player locked, I play on the broadcast camera. So I actually go back between the two of them. So that's just the way I play. I'm the right tools for the job for what suits me for the different modes. So yeah, it's just been really fun to go back to 2K14 this year and really experience that. But it really drives home how that pushy. I mean, people say VC's been in the game for years, which it has been, but you can see how it's gotten pushier and greedier over the years. And the proof is right there. If you go back to the old games, you can see it. And again, this is why it's worth going back to old games and saying, hey, you can see how things have changed and how this is actually a problem. You know, if you want me to bring evidence, receipts, as they say these days, they can certainly do that. But beyond that, you know, it's not just about hating or even criticizing the current games. I'm just enjoying 2K14 at the moment.
Well, NBA 2K17 and prior, you felt that it was about the NBA.
Yes.
Like it was more about the NBA. The focus was more on the NBA. And I think you can tell when you play those games and how the NBA portion of those games feels and whatnot from an offensive and defensive standpoint. Especially, I would say 2K16 might be the most sim game that they came out with on the PS4 generation, especially since my brothers and I have been playing it a little bit more lately and whatnot with our custom rosters and everything. And you don't have the ridiculous park stuff in the park infiltrating the NBA. It's about authenticity. It's about, the 4 size up system. It's about the players having their signature moves and all of that stuff. So yeah, I would say that 2K17 and prior, it was, more about NBA authenticity in the NBA portion of the game. I did want to point out one more thing about MyTEAM. I know I've been talking about it a lot, but I'm finally back into it, and it's kind of nice. When you're playing, I did a thread on at D4 3G. I'm showing my highlights from the Knicks series, where I played them on Rookie Pro and All-Star and showed different highlights from each games. When you guys get up to the All-Star difficulty, you're going to feel like the computer is clamping you all over the perimeter. Like they are just all over you. You can't get by anybody. You could even have an elite ball handler and you feel like everywhere you go, you're getting clamped. And it doesn't matter by who. Like you think you have a mismatch, but you don't. You're going to step back and they're going to have a hand in your face. Like you're going to think you created space with a step back and you're going to shoot and you're going to brick the majority of the time. My recommendation, and I showed you in the highlights, find cutters, utilize, exploit the double teams that they do in the post. So, go to a big guy. They're going to double you. Use icon passing and look for guys on the weak side cutting, pass out to shooters. If the shot's not available, go back into the post and do it again, and set a lot of high screens and use off-ball screens and shoot immediately when you catch the ball with space. You got to play smart, and I think it's very unrealistic the way the computer plays defense, but I am right now enjoying the challenge of it. But I did want to put those tips out there. Use the post and fadeaways. Fadeaways are king. They're the least. It's funny. It's like the way to avoid being contested. Like use a guy like Dirk. Use a guy who has a decent fadeaway and get him in the post. Possibly try to get a mismatch, but get him in the post and fade away if you can't get a shot.
I mean, there's a great scorer in NBA history who made great use of the fadeaway, a few of them, in fact, but one that we are quite big fans of. It's great to hear you having fun with MyTEAM. Again, it does fill me with confidence that when I finally get my hands on the game, hopefully this week, if I don't, I'll certainly be calling the store and chasing that up ASAP. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting that. I've actually had a lot of fun playing Triple Threat offline in MyTEAM in the last couple of years, especially 2K21. I would recommend it. It is fun for those quick games, and it's kind of like playing Blacktop, just having that 3-on-3 experience, quick games. It's a good way to get some XP, to get the season rewards and better cards. There's some very fun challenges you can do. It's great for evolution cards as well, to be able to get those extra points here and there and get some quick games through, and just to rack up points or assists or whatever statistical goals you need to get, or wins, etc. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend giving that a shot as well. I know you're playing through Domination, and that's a great mode as well. But I do love that MyTEAM does have lots of different modes like that, plus the daily challenges. I do love the seasons approach that they introduced last year. So I'm definitely a fan of that stuff. And it gives you something to do. The live service model has its problems, and it is tied into the recurrent revenue mechanics that we mentioned so often because they are a recurring problem on in current games in recent years. But at the same time, the upside is there is lots of stuff to do. The downside is once, of course, once the servers are shut down, that mode goes away. But while it's up, it actually can be a lot of fun. So I'm glad to see you getting into it, and I'm looking forward to doing it myself.
Yeah, we need to get you on next gen so we can have a podcast where you give all your impressions.
Yeah,
I'm very anxious to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have some slider tweaks even on next gen that I can pass along to you for the My NBA and exhibition portion that I think are helpful. One of them being turn body up sensitivity to 0 for both CPU and user, to try to get rid of some of those two-man canned animations and the sucking in animations and whatnot. But I'll shoot those over to you in due time. I haven't been spending much time on the 2K22 current gen version. I started working on a cyberface for Vin Baker because I think the one in the game is incredibly poor. And that face is almost finalized. But because we've been playing Legends on next gen and because I've got into MyTEAM on next gen, I haven't had much of a reason to put the current gen version on PC much more. I mean, the modding is thriving, as you've noticed, in the 2K22 modding section. I mean, there's people coming out with jerseys. I think there's people, either re-releasing or making floors. There's people experimenting with globals. There's people making cyber faces, all of that stuff. So the modding in the NLSC modding section on the NLSC is doing really well.
It is.
And that is nice to see. It's nice to see that I do wish we had gotten the next gen version.
For sure.
PC,
as we said in previous shows, including last week at our initial impressions episode, the silver lining is, of course, that there's a lot of compatibility with the mods, and Luya was able to come out with the hook much sooner and everything, and it's great to see. Of course, as always, shout out to our modding community. Thank you for sharing your work. Thank you for sharing your tutorials. TG So Good already getting on some tutorials there for modding and other things already, which TG always does such great work. Shout out to the goods for that. Also make use of our upload facilities, obviously. Before we move on, I did want to circle back to 2K16 because, of course, that is a very strong release. And a recurring issue that we've been talking about many shows now is the weakness and inaccuracies of the historical players in NBA 2K. 2K16 was the year they were brought in the whole historical rating scale, which I thought was a good idea. Do you remember, because you've done some work with the 2K16 rosters, was there more accuracy at the time with the historical players? Was there less copy and paste at that time? Because it always struck me as a good idea, but how accurate was it? How much of that was just marketing hype? Was there a time that they were doing more accuracy with those rosters? Because I feel like when we first got the historical players, we saw more of that. But then over the years, obviously, there has been more copy and paste as they've added players. But for 2K16, was there a bit more accuracy then?
Okay, I want to make a point about something. Most of that was hype, because if you actually go in, and I shared screenshots on that really long 2K21 thread when I was showing those inaccuracies, a lot of those are in 2K16.
Right.
They've been doing that copy paste spreadsheet stuff for years and neglecting the historical teams and whatnot. And it has gotten a little bit worse over time, but NBA 2K16 was still cluttered with copy and paste tendencies, and J.R. Ryder having all of LeBron James' signature package, and
Sure.
the all of that stuff. So no, that was still a problem with 2K16. And here's the thing. So how I work on filling the retro teams, and I also work on adding new teams, and I have a work in progress roster for 2K16 for Ultimate Classic teams, and I really need to get back to that and try to finish that at some point, because it was coming along really nicely. The reason I see a lot of this stuff is because I am going into the tendencies and trying to adjust the players, and I'm going into the attributes, and I'm going into the signatures, and I'm watching tape on the players and stuff like that. And the thing is that 2K knows that their target audience and the average consumer is not doing what I'm doing. They know that the average 2K player doesn't know their basketball history that well. And in the chances of those people kids, young adults, and whatnot going into the tendencies of a guy like Mario Chalmers or going into the tendencies of a guy like Luis Scola, all of that stuff. They know that the average gamer will not do that. That's why they've been able to get away with it for so long, right? And those teams, people are not going to question why Luis Scola is spending a lot more time out on the perimeter than he is in the post. Or he's not spending enough time in the high post, he's spending more time behind the three-point line. Like, the average gamer is not going to question that. So that's why they can get away with this for so long. It's been years, 5+ years of them just basically fudging, well, I don't know how else to put it, the classic teams and just throwing it together and it being so inaccurate and pretty disrespectful at that. And how many threads have you seen outside of mine on it?
I mean, a lot of people just look at overall ratings and faces. And if they're right or look
that's
pretty good.
Thing. Right, exactly.
You know.
Right. Or they say, well, they work for 2K. How can you know better than 2K? I can tell you that David Wesley, I can tell you that I mean, I can tell you that David Wesley shouldn't have a 95 on alley-oop.
Exactly. It's funny. I mean, in my interview with Rod Redikoff last year, he mentioned that a lot of, they knew that they tried to be accurate with the rosters, but they knew a lot of people would wait until the NLSC rosters made by Tim and Lutz back in the day. A lot of people waited for the community rosters, which, and sometimes they did do a better job because they could do research, and certainly before the days of official updates being commonplace and pushed through automatically as they are these days, the community rosters were, and they are still big, of course, but that they were king, and they were able to account for things, especially with rookies, where you kind of had to guess when the game was before you'd even seen them play in the NBA. You had to do some guesswork and adjustments there in the default rosters. So I don't envy that's we had to do that with community rosters as well. So I absolutely understand that. But yes, the idea that that the official rosters can't be wrong because they're official is a sign of the times, I think, of how that attitude has changed. But that's unfortunate. I'll have to go back and look at some tendencies for that 2K. That 2K11 to 2K14, it felt like they were putting a little bit more effort back in then. Maybe it's just my imagination. I have been playing with some retro teams in 2K14 PS4 lately. It's been my kick as well as the My Career stuff that I've been doing. And it's felt like it's been pretty accurate. Kind of really on this 1995 throwback at the moment. I don't know why, but it's quite randomly, 26 years ago. But I mean, I feel like there was a time when there was at least a little bit more accuracy. And certainly for 2K11, they went right out with the Jordan Challenge and NBA's greatest.
It's cheap labor, Andrew. And the modding community is doing it for free. You want to fix your retro rosters and make them more accurate, and if you actually care, you got people out there that will do it for free.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, there are people that will do that for NBA 2K for free. And it would, but then again, we've talked about it before. There's a whole marketing aspect of this, and first off, it's who you know a lot of times, who they allow into the company. We know how business works. Number one. Number two, there's the whole marketing of the now game.
That's true.
The now players, the now pro. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. But
the funny thing is that if you do get a really great fixed roster, why not? I mean, I'm not about to condone stealing people's work, but if anyone's going to steal work, it might as well be 2K taking community edits and putting them themselves. They've done it with sliders. They've looked at community sliders. We know this for a fact and said, okay, this is the popular adjustments. Let's make that the new default going forward. We've seen that happen before. So it's strange that they don't take some of those community edits and say, okay, well, you've done the work for us. It's ultimately you're editing our game, so we can take it back into it. And it's not, whether they employ people or not, to not take any of those fixes at all is, I think, myopic. I mean, if I was to make rosters, if anyone's going to steal my work, then it might as well be 2K and have the default rosters not have those problems moving forward. It's interesting they don't. But again, it does come down to the politics and the pushing the now game that you've talked about.
Yeah, I think that it also probably was easier to do it when it was just mostly the NBA teams and only a few classic and not as many classic teams. But again, there's billions of people in this world, and there's a lot of people that do know the history of the game and do play 2K. And there's a lot of people in the modding community and otherwise that would do justice to these rosters. And it's cheap labor. Some will do it for free. Some would do it for a very low fee. I just think it's criminal what they do with these classic teams and how they neglect them, and it's not fair. It hurts the gameplay. It hurts the way the players play on the floor. They move sluggishly. They don't shoot properly. They don't move the way they should. Michael Finley feels like the worst player in the NBA ever in NBA 2K22 because he's a 63 on speed and he has like no acceleration. When you use him and his dribbling is terrible and it just doesn't feel like anything like Michael Finley. However, on Live 10, I can make almost full court shots with Michael Finley game winners. So.
I was going to say, it's an indictment that the past prime Finley in Live 10 still can play more like like he should.
Right, I had some good plays with him in that game actually against you. You can check those highlights on the YouTube. But yeah, the roster issues will always bother me until they're adequately looked at. And obviously, my thread didn't make enough noise, even though it got tens of thousands of impressions and it made Reddit and whatnot. It's like, well, it's still not a big enough noise.
What else can you do?
For them to,
yeah,
right.
But we will revisit 2K22 throughout the season. Hopefully by next week I will have my PS5 copy and everything sorted out with both PC and PS4 playing that. I'll have some more impressions, get my written reviews done as well. As I said, I am feeling optimistic about PS5. The more you've talked about it, the more you've shown me. But we will circle back to that in future shows. But for this week at least, we didn't put out a mailbag call. We don't have a mailbag this week, but we will be using the segment instead for you to throw a question out to me. So you mentioned it before the show, so I'll throw it over to you. You have a question for me this week.
I have two, actually. The first one is, last week we talked about our favorite launches in video game history. What would you say are the top 3 worst launches in 2K history? And 2K22 might be right up there if your problems don't get fixed. But what are the most... the top 3 worst launches in video game history? It can be any company.
Sure. So, I mean, 2K22 from a personal standpoint has been for me, it's been unfortunate, but it's just a situation with the way ordering it in the post, opting for the standard post instead of express post, which should have sprung for the express post. And unfortunately, there has been this issue with PC maybe, and that's kind of on me. So, I won't say 2K22 objectively. For me, subjectively, it's kind of been a disappointment, but it's some of that has been, a lot of it has, in fact, has been circumstances beyond 2K's control. So I won't be too harsh on them for that just yet. Let me maybe I'll circle back to that after I've spent more time with both versions. One that comes to mind immediately, and this may be a cheat, but can there be more of a failed launch or a bad launch than one that didn't happen? NBA Elite 11 comes to mind. A complete failure to launch. Does that count?
Yeah, I would count that because all the lead up to it. And remember the Durant interview?
Oh, yeah.
They had the Durant interview where he's sitting in front of the TV, and they had other interviews with NBA players that were playing it, and they were like, oh, the movement feels... And you can even tell they were doubting themselves when they were saying it on that ad. But no, because there was such a lead up to it and the rebranding and the commercials and all of that stuff, and then, it just fell on its face. So I think that counts.
So I'll go with Elite 11 then, because again, there can't be much of a worse launch than that. I'll say NBA Live 14 as well, because after the failure of 11, the failure of Live 13, the cancellation of that, we thought that it had years to work on this. As we would later find out, it was more a case of rebuilding the team and trying to do all kinds of research, and then Live 13 had to be scrapped because it just wasn't working out, and they started again and again, and it wasn't 4 years of work from Elite 11's failure to launch. Live 14, I think, was just... That was them trying to make a big splash after being out of the game for years. 2K14, at the time, didn't impress me. And that was for some personal reasons as much as anything else. It had some problems. No creative player, some missing features, etc. MyGM instead of the traditional experience and the problems that the first iteration of MyGM had. But 2K14's launch was still pretty successful, objectively speaking, beyond my personal problems at the time with it. It was a pretty successful launch. Live 14, on the other hand, total bust. And there are aspects of Live 14 that I think do have merit, but again, I played Live 14. I got my PS4 at a midnight launch, brought it home. It was the first game I played on PS4, and it was like, man, did I just waste my money doing this day one? Because I just didn't want to play it again. Infamously, I said it off air to John. John and Ben and I were talking late after recording one night, and John said, "Did you get any enjoyment out of Live 14 at all?" And I said, "Yes," when I ejected the disc. I felt pretty good then. Live 14 was a complete bust.
Perfect answers. By the way, none of that surprises me. I think my three there's one out of my three that would surprise you. I'm surprised 2K18 didn't make your list.
Oh, well, I only said two so far. So,
okay, whoops. Oh, okay, go for it.
That being said, I would probably say 2K18 because I've said this in articles before. I think I've said it on the podcast as well. But 2K18 just has the wrong vibe about it. And I know this is another excuse to make fun of B-Fresh, but it's kind of encapsulates. And I said this in my retrospective of 2K18, that it felt like every decision they made with that game was wrong somehow. That it didn't feel right. And there's a strange thing when a new game comes out. Sometimes, especially if you really enjoyed the last game, you kind of feel a bit wistful of having to move on. And I don't know how I'd describe it. Maybe it's like going from, well, here it's in Australia, it's going from primary to high school. I guess over there it's elementary to middle school or junior high. Going to a new school kind of thing, like going from being at the top of the class, the oldest grade, the oldest year, to the bottom again. It's kind of like that with a new game sometimes, and especially if you're really enjoying that past game. And I really love 2K17, as I've said before, and you can relate to that. 2K18, and just everything, like even, and this is going to sound like Calculon from Futurama, that even the font in the menus of My Career was like, the vibe is wrong. And there were many more problems than the font, than the typeface, don't get me wrong. I'm not focusing on that, but it's just, you can find these things everywhere in 2K18 that just encapsulate this game doesn't feel right. The vibe is off. The gameplay was off. The story in My Career was ridiculous. The first iteration of the neighborhood didn't go as well as for all the issues with the neighborhood in the city. Later iterations have done it better than that first neighborhood. So everything about 2K18 just felt off. And again, the paying for haircuts, and then to fix that, they nerfed it to 100 VC when you could have made it free, like they did in 2K19. So even when they tried to fix problems, they picked the wrong solution to the problem. So I'd say 2K18, I think. And it was also the game, I think, that really broke people's trust in the brand, and that really destroyed a lot of goodwill that 2K had built up. So I think 2K18, though it was a much better game than Live 14 or obviously Elite 11, then it was still a problem with the still one of the worst launches and one of the worst or most off-feeling games that I've ever played. I will throw out one more. If Elite 11 doesn't count because it technically didn't launch, I would say Live 07 on across the board. Live 07 after Live 06 was even the problems with Live 06 on 360, it was still had so much more going for it with gameplay and everything. And of course, on last gen, a PC Live 06 for PC was a very strong release, and the PS2 version and original Xbox version, that was a very well received game. There was no version of Live 07 that was particularly good, so that was also a pretty bad launch as well. And of course, the PS3 version got cancelled. So I throw that either that's the honorable mention, or Elite 11's the honorable mention because it wasn't technically ever released. But I do think a complete cancellation on the scale that really set the series back as much as it did with Elite 11, that you can count it either way. So that's kind of my top three with a 4-point play, if you will, or an honorable mention.
So we have two in common out of your four that you mentioned, and I actually have these ranked from most disappointing to not as. No, so I'm going to start with number 3. So you're going to be surprised by this, but NBA 2K16, when it first launched, and I made a thread about this on the NLSC, is one of the worst games I've ever played when it first launched, when it was day one. when we first installed it. You remember how you had shots and the players were looking off to the side? Like you were shooting.
Yes.
Yeah, and the players weren't even like looking at the hoop. The game by default, when my brother and I put it on, our players were running in the mud. They were so slow. You couldn't do anything. The exaggerated movements, players looking off to the side when they shot. It looked like just it was a mess. And we were so disappointed because I had just come off of NBA 2K15, which all three of us enjoyed, my brothers and I, we all enjoyed the 2K15 gameplay. It wasn't very moddable, but overall we had good vibes about the game, right? Like we thought the game good. And on MyTEAM, I spent a ton of time on MyTEAM on 2K15. I really enjoyed the mode. I loved the gameplay. Everything just felt great. But 2K16, I made a thread about this. I was like, we need to talk about the issues with this game and how it feels and the weird stuff that's going on the court. And of course, they ended up patching it, and I ended up making slider tweaks and whatnot, and we ended up really enjoying the game later on. But at launch, we were losing it. Like my brothers and I were like, what is this? This looks like a rushed product. They don't care anymore, all of that stuff. So 2K16 is number 3. Number 2 is Live 07. And Live 07 was the turning point where we switched. We ended up switching to NBA 2K at that point because Live 07 was not deep enough. It didn't allow for multi-user season mode on next gen, and next gen being Xbox 360 console years. It might be the worst animated game I've ever seen overall, which you could tell immediately. The worst first impression ever is when you get out there with Tracy McGrady and you go to do a dunk and he rockets towards the hoop and you're trying to shoot and it just feels absolutely terrible and the frame rate looks ridiculous and all of that stuff. Live 07 ranks number 2 for me because that's what killed the live series for my brothers and I. We were always playing the live games, always, from the mid-90s all the way up into the mid-2000s, and that was it. We switched to 2K7. We had multi-user experience and fantasy draft options and whatnot in season mode, all of that stuff. Number 1 is 2K18, and the reason why is it's like you had kind of alluded to. Could there have been a worst first impression when you put on that game? You put on that game and you jump into, just say like a regular NBA game, and you're on the broadcast view, and in front of your face are balloons dropping into the crowd. And it's like in front of the action. Like one of the worst ideas they ever came up from a presentation element is the stupid balloons dropping into the crowd in front of your face while you're trying to play the game. And you had the dark arenas, and you had the oversized heads for all the players. Remember how many oversized heads there were? There was an entire thread on the modding section of 2K18 of fixing oversized heads.
I remember, yeah.
And I want to say there were hundreds of them. There's people with their eyes going through their eyelids. It just felt like a completely rushed game. And of course, that's also what brought in the new motion system. And so you put on the game and your guys are sliding all around the court and they're skating and floating above the court. And you're like, okay, these hip riding animations are absolutely ridiculous and they're completely overpowering. And it was a monumental disappointment for us. And I think that's when 2K really started to go downhill and people started complaining more. And when you saw their scores start dipping on Metacritic and you saw all those negative comments, is it started really with NBA 2K18. So I would say that 2K18 overall is the most disappointing release of, my lifetime.
We did a show on it. We did a show on it. We felt that it was in many ways a turning point for the series.
Yeah, it's just all the wrong vibes. And, I understand growing pains in a new motion system. And I understand that it's not always going to be great and whatnot. But it's just the amount of issues that there was. And then from a presentation element, and then like you have mentioned and you told me about, all the microtransactions, the push for that and the ridiculousness surrounding that and all of that. It was just the perfect storm. And I think that in my opinion, 2K is still recovering from that, or trying to.
Well, it was also the first year comparing the 2K18 to 2K19 developer blogs that we could identify blatant lies from the before, not just overselling improvements, because every official preview is going to do that, right? But that was the first year that we could say, okay, this last year you didn't just present this as good and then say, it wasn't just a case of throwing it under the bus. It was, and this has never got as much traction as it should have gotten. And I especially brought it up multiple times and linked to that article, and I should probably post it again as some kind of NLSC flashback. And I should do that with some of my old articles. NLSC flashback on social media. I should post them a bit more often and from the archives. But we could actually see that stuff that they presented as improvements were admitted Band-Aid fixes for problems with the new motion system a year later. It was the first year we kind of said this was hard evidence in writing. I can't believe they've been so blatant, so bold to do this. Is that this was a lie, not just overselling an improvement that fell a bit short, and they've been able to improve it even more with another year working on it. This is an absolute lie that they lied about this, it was so blatant.
It was the beginning of people not trusting 2K, really, and like you had stated, it comes off of a very well received 2K17, a game
which people
that
forget
played.
Because people say, people hated 2K17. They didn't. There's a lot of positive.
No, I go back and look at the archived folders and whatnot, and what people were saying about it over on all folders. Did I just say folders? Threads. On Operation Sports and then on the NLSC and whatnot, and it was far better received.
Yeah.
By a lot. People forget that. And, even the Metacritic scores and whatnot and the user reviews in general. It was just such a big change from a well-received title, and there was just too many negative aspects of it. I do have one more question before we wrap up the show for you, though, because I was thinking about this. I was thinking about the sucking in, like on NBA 2K22, which was super frustrating. And it's something that's really been a problem since 2K18, actually. What is the most annoying mechanic in video game history for you? In basketball video game history, I should say.
I mean, you've got some of the bad games or very flawed games that have got some really weird mechanics, like a kid sports basketball where you got to press two buttons to make a jump shot, for example. But that's a shovelware game. So we're talking about like mainstream AAA releases.
Yeah, exactly.
I've mentioned it before. The 3 shoot buttons in Live 07 really was a bust. At the time, it seemed like a good idea. Oh yes, we're expanding the shooting controls, but no, it didn't work out very well. Shot aiming last year in 2K21 comes to mind as well. I don't think that worked out as well. The lack of a sprint button in Elite 11, shot aiming in Elite 11 was a pretty much a bust as well. Those would probably be some of the first ones to come to mind. Absolute worst.
Yeah, I'll make it easier for you, though, because I'm not talking about buttons. I'm not talking about something that you can potentially avoid. Like, for example, if the shot stick use, you didn't have to use it. Right. So I'm talking about something like I talked about, like the sucking in, like I can't change that. Like
right.
if I go up for a layup and my guy is 4 to 5 feet behind me, there's no way in 2K22, there is absolutely no way for me to avoid that sucking in mechanic that occurs. So I'm thinking more of, to make it a little bit easier too, I'm thinking more of a mechanic that happens in a game that you can't change with your buttons.
Right. I think it really does come down to heavily canned moments. The CPU interceptions, blind interceptions, where they're just looking completely the other way, but they stick their hand out and like they have the force and get that steal. Turnovers where you've made it's not on you. It's just very false. And also brutal comeback logic as well, where it just feels very fake that your players just completely forget how to play basketball, and the CPU opponent just suddenly is hitting every shot and making every stop, and it's done to make it challenging and competitive with the human user, but it feels so fake, so contrived that you just feel like switching the game off. So anything that's particularly noticeably contrived, canned moments, the sucking in, like you say, it's anything where you feel out of control, that it's not a case of get good. You can be as good as you want as good as you can be on the sticks, but the game is deciding, and we've seen some of this in On Fire Edition, to be fair, and Jam 2010 as well, that you just can't do anything. I think that's the worst mechanic, with anything that feels obviously fake and contrived.
Right. It's almost like you can see it coming. Like you know that momentum spike is going to happen. And like you can't do anything.
You say, this is it. It's making its run. I can see it happening.
Right.
And it's tough because you need that to be competitive and to get that challenge from the CPU and to contend with the human user and a human mind that can think laterally and take advantage of things and think in ways that the CPU can't, because there are limitations to the AI in a basketball video game. The best AI we have in the world is not going into basketball video games. It's going into slightly more important technological improvements to improve mankind and the quality of life and whatnot. But yeah, it's when it gets really fake and contrived and frustrating, and you feel like I failed not because of what I did, but because the game wanted me to fail.
Yeah, I'd say there's 4 different ones for me that are the most annoying and ridiculous and affect gameplay in such a big way. There's 4. There's 1, the sliding. Like I can't do anything about it, right? Yep. Even if I try to slow the game down to a crawl, oftentimes it's just there, the skating and the floating above the court, and it's really something that's tough to combat, and it's something that I can't really do anything about. 2, I would say the sucking in. Again, it's something that even if I lower body up sensitivity to 0 and I try to lower the contact defense frequency and whatnot, it's still just happening all over the floor. And it impacts gameplay in such a big way. And it's like that gravitational pull. And I can't get rid of it. And like you had stated in the past, it's almost like they're trying to do like a Band-Aid fix to like make the defense better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not making the defense better in a realistic way. It's just in a frustrating way. Then the picking up the dribble, and you know how much I hate this. And it was in NBA Live 19, and it's also in NBA 2K22. And, you're an NBA player, and you face up on your guy, and you try to make a move right. And even if he doesn't completely cut you off, any body contact or air contact, ghost defense we call it, will make you just drop the ball and pick it up. Like you're an NBA player, we're dropping the ball constantly. We don't even do that, and we weren't even doing that in grade school. Right, when we were getting bumped and whatnot. So dropping the ball constantly, it has really destroyed the face-up game, to be honest with you, and since 2K18, and it's super frustrating. And then slow motion side by sides, I just it's another Band-Aid fix. It's another way. And when I call slow motion side by sides, it's also like basically slow motion hip riding, and it's where you do get a chance to, you get like a first step on your guy and he's kind of on the side of your body, but instead of making a strong move to the hoop like you would in real life and, accelerating, you get put into this slow motion drag. And you not only don't get to the hoop most of the time on this, oftentimes your guy will stop and pick up the ball and pick up his dribble, but you're considered like it's a complete blanket contest and a full contest, and your chances of scoring, even though you should have had a path to the hoop and be able to make a strong move, your chances of scoring are almost 0. So super annoying mechanic. Again, the hip riding thing started with at astronomical levels started with 2K18, and I believe the mechanics only gotten worse over time, and it also impacts the way you control your player in the post, because now if you try to do a quick spin, it's always this wide, slow motion, ridiculous spin. And it doesn't look realistic at all. And players, human bodies, when they spin, don't even move that slow in real life. It looks like it's in slow motion, and it just ruins the post game, and everything becomes a blanket contest. And you can't just do a quick spin move on a guy, all of that stuff. So I'd say that those pieces, those are the top 4 most annoying mechanics. And unfortunately, all 4 of those are pretty much part of the new motion system.
And like I say, it's tough because you can change sliders in modes that allow it, but there are some things that we just can't. And sometimes we'll be able to mod animations and do some fixes ourselves, but again, that doesn't can't always be used online because it means a modified executable file, so it would cause people to get banned or at least not be able to connect. So there are issues there. I did want to circle back to the first question of disappointing releases. Within our community, Live 2001, that was the year they rebuilt the game from scratch. Rod mentioned that on my interview with him, and the PC version was also delayed until February, I believe, from memory, because they didn't have a big enough team to work on that, and that small team that they were still rebuilding the team at the time also meant that was the reason they didn't do a PC version of Live 2002, which was and I do like 2002 and have a lot of nostalgia for it. And it was my first PlayStation system, the PS2, but it was very controversial in our community because, of course, PC community and couldn't mod it. Stuck with Live 2001, which had its issues over the years. Live 2003 was kind of controversial because even though it had the great new mechanic of freestyle control, it was with the courtside comedy cutscenes and the big blocks and that up-tempo pace. It wasn't as arcade as a lot. It was more arcade than people wanted. It wasn't as sim as people wanted. So that was kind of an issue. 2004, 05, and 06 were much stronger releases for people who wanted that more of a realistic sim style, and they were much stronger launches within our community. And that's not to say that 2001, 2002, and 2003 are horrible games, because they are definitely not anywhere close to the worst basketball games I've ever played. But I do remember those launches being kind of controversial. And for me personally, Live 19, because I could see that it was going in a direction that I didn't like. A lot of the improvements that really needed to be made since Live 14 still hadn't been made, and Dynasty, our franchise, was still disappointing and everything, and the focus on the streets. So Live 19, I think, was a bit of a disappointing release for me as well. But I wouldn't. Those are kind of honorable mentions for me. I wouldn't put them in the top three, but they were controversial for their own reasons.
Yeah, imagine if with Live 2003 and Live 2004, if the developers understood at the time that people wanted a little bit more of a sim game, and I think about this sometimes because those games are 100 miles an hour. They really are. They're really fast. Imagine if they had tailored the action to more of a realistic pace. I think that the game would have been a little bit even, not only better received, but also even talked about possibly a little bit more fondly today, because the mechanics were there.
Absolutely.
It had really good mechanics, yeah.
I mean, it's after some slider tweaks, that 2004 to 06 play a very good game of basketball for their time. But when I do play them with default sliders, I do remember, out of the box, yes, we did need to adjust them a little bit. So that's one thing that I tried to take into account.
Game speed at 60. They put game speed at 60, Andrew, too. Did you notice that?
They did, yeah.
By default, they made it faster. They did that on purpose. So it's crazy, yeah.
And that's on the simulation settings. Yeah, arcade is even crazier. But I did have to take that into account when I was doing my retrospectives on them. I played games with both my sliders that I've always enjoyed playing with on those games and the default sliders as well, because it is very easy to forget that out of the box they weren't quite what we wanted, but we could also see that the mechanics were there, and that if we did change those sliders here and there and just change some shooting percentages and game speed and whatnot, that we would get the experience that we wanted, which we ultimately did. And of course 2K had brought in sliders a couple of years before Live, or at least a year before Live did. And again, it's why I'm so much in favor of when we did have the two games, and hopefully we can one day have that competition again. People talk about stealing ideas and taking where the ideas came in first. I don't care. If that's a great idea that kind of game, that kind of sim game should have, each game should be doing its own version of it and doing it well. I don't care who had the idea first. I don't think it's stealing. In fact, if it is stealing, I'm all for them stealing, because a good idea is worth borrowing. And some of those games, Live and 2K, when they were both coming out, should have been taken from each other, because they were both doing some things that were ideas of merit, and I wanted to see them in both games. So, yeah, I have no problem with it at all.
Yeah, I still never understand how it's 2021 and we have less basketball gaming options than ever before. So much for evolution of the industry, and so much for, advancements in technology that everybody can have their hands on now. And, what really boggles my mind, because I showed you this. Remember how I have Unreal Engine installed, and I showed you how I was starting to, kind of dabble into seeing if I could, mess around and make some sort of a basketball game.
Sure.
Everybody had options. This isn't something they had back in the day when all of these basketball games were being made. Everybody has access to this, and it's free. It's a free game making program, Unreal Engine, Unity, etc. And in the days of this, everybody having access to this and the amount of people we have on this earth, nobody else is making a basketball game. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
No.
Nobody else, but nobody else with all of these resources, and free resources even. Nobody else is jumping into the basketball video game space. I think it's insane, and it's super unfortunate.
It speaks to the market strength of 2K, though, that anyone says, well, whatever we make is not going to... This is obviously what EA has done with them failing to move the needle with Live over the past generation. So what is the point trying to challenge 2K's might and try to be an alternative when people don't seem to want an alternative? People want an alternative until they have an alternative and it's not good enough. Which I understand, but there's no support of it and wanting to see it get better. So, and that's not to say, people should have bought NBA Live, and even when it wasn't as good as they wanted it to be, that's not the point I'm trying to make here. But it's funny whenever people want an alternative until EA says, okay, we'll try and get back into space. Oh no, you should go away. Well, what do you want? Realistically, EA are the only people that can put out that game, or are most likely to put out an NBA licensed game. So. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Like
I also think that a lot of those people, all those people on the ground who don't have an agenda or who are not connected to 2K, even the people that complain and say, "Oh, NBA Live sucks," or they say, "Why would Live come back? What a waste!" All of that stuff. All of those people still want that alternative out there, and they can complain and moan and all of that stuff all of they want, but at the end of the day, they still want it out there. I don't care what they say, and that's usually the case. And I'm not saying that with everybody, but I think that's with the large majority, because having that alternative and having that extra content to look at, having something else to compare to, all of that stuff, I think that the majority of people, if you ask them straight up and you asked it that way, they would say that that's a good thing. Right.
Yeah.
And that they would want that out there. So I think that a lot of people honestly just like to complain, and they also like to have this superiority complex. But deep down inside, I don't think that they feel that way.
They enjoy dunking on something. They enjoy being able to laugh and point and yell fail. That is definitely part of online culture, unfortunately. But we've said it before. We don't know what's going to happen in that space. But if nothing else, in the meantime, 2K22 is shaping up to be perhaps one of the better releases in recent years. We will let the dust settle on that and continue to give our impressions on it. But once again, I'd love to normalize retro basketball gaming. And it doesn't need to be, when you say retro, people think maybe Double Dribble. Hey, which if you want to go back and play it, by all means do so. We will, because we're crazy like that. But there's always talk about what retro means. Does retro gaming have a cutoff point? But what do you call going back and playing a game from 2005? I mean, it's certainly not current gaming or new gaming, whether retro has got to be really old school games or not. We can split hairs on that, but if you do want to split hairs on the meaning of retro, normalize playing an old favorite, whether it's 2K11, Live 10, Live 2005, 2K16, 2K17, whatever, 2K14. Go back and play some of these games. If you're not enjoying the most recent one, or if you just need to take a break from it, pull out an old favorite and see if it still sparks joy, if you will.
And do your best to find somebody to play with. I do want to point something out too, really quick, about 2K22. There's two things that my brother and I really enjoy about it and think that is the best since 2K17, and it definitely changes the experience. And we're talking about on both current gen and next gen for this. The dribbling is tighter, and you have more control of it, and it's fun to string together moves instead of just initiating the size up. That's one. Number two, the shooting. I think that the shooting mechanics are the best that they've been since 2K17, and they make a lot of sense. They're not rushed. They're not too slow, all of that stuff. So those two aspects, having control of those two aspects, make a big difference for my brother and I. And that's, we're enjoying the game a bit more because of that. So, but yeah, no, I agree. If you don't like the current title, or you're frustrated with the current title and whatnot, revisit some of those retro titles, because there's a lot of good games, and you'll be surprised at how much fun you have.
Definitely. And we will continue to do that ourselves and continue to push for that and normalize that retro gaming, or the old school gaming, whatever you want to call it, going back to an old favorite. It's definitely something that we enjoy, and give it a try. You might find that you enjoy it too. And we will continue to talk about NBA 2K22 throughout its life cycle. And hopefully by next week, Derek, I will have all versions of the game that I have pre-ordered and technically own, but don't have in my possession at this time.
Well, I can't wait to hear your impressions on the next-gen version of 2K22. I've shown you a lot of footage of me playing it, and I think you kind of are getting an idea of, what's different about it. But until you get your, in comparison to 2K21 and whatnot, but I think the true telling of how you feel about it will be when you get on the sticks. So
not until I'm racing around the city in my go-kart will I really get a true feel of the latest basketball game.
Listen, I played Garfield Kart the other day, and it's why I want to point something out. I saw that footage that you sent me, and it's about 1% of Garfield Kart.
Well, as far as it doesn't have a lasagna-eating cat in the game, so I mean that's
right. Exactly. I didn't. When you were driving around there, I didn't see any power-ups. I didn't see you. Sure, you were flying through the air, but not as gracefully as I was with Garfield.
Well, Ronnie said, "Eat your heart out, Mario Kart," but he knows not to challenge the might of Garfield Kart.
Right, you notice they mentioned that. Yeah, exactly.
Mario Kart, but not Garfield Kart. Yes, right. I mean, move over Mario. Right. It's yeah.
Right. It's like saying, somebody saying, eat your heart out, Kobe. They wouldn't say eat your heart out, Jordan. Right. It's the same type of thing.
So tune in next week for more discussion of Garfield Kart, as always. But that has brought us to the end of episode number 393 of the NLSC podcast. Once again, we didn't do a mailbag prompt this week, but we will be doing more mailbag segments in the future, so hit us up at podcast@nb-live.com or in the forum or any of our socials, which we'll be promoting shortly. But yes, the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nb-live.com. We're also on all the major podcatching apps and platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, to name just a few. On those platforms, search for NLSC Podcast, look for our logo, and that will be us, or keep streaming it on the NLSC, of course, as long as you're tuning in and enjoying the show each and every week. That is the main thing. And speaking of socials, Derek, what are yours, and any other final words for our listeners this week?
Tune in to Holding Court with D for Free on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, CLNS Media, Podcast Addict, Amazon Audible, etc. Hopefully recording new episodes soon. I do want to say before I continue to plug my socials, keep submitting those top 10 plays. I just released the top 10 plays of the week for September 18th, 2021. I love getting those highlights. I think the variety has been great lately, and people are really getting into it. So please submit those, and also make sure to connect with me and others on Parsec, so you can get some retro basketball gaming in. Tune into where I'm the most active on Twitter at D4384, on my gaming channel at D43G. I am on the NLSC as well, D43, and I'm a team member over there. And then I'm also on YouTube, and I've been uploading more gameplay videos of NBA 2K22 and other games recently, so tune into my YouTube channel, D43.
Of course, I am Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. The NLSC is on Twitter and Facebook, the NLSC. We're on Instagram, NLSC Basketball. Our YouTube is youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nb-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. But yes, that's all for this week. As always, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.